The Los Lunas Decalogue Stone. In 1933, a professor from the University of New Mexico named Frank Hibben made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his career. On a remote hillside near Los Lunas, New Mexico, he found a massive boulder covered in ancient script. The inscription appeared to be the Ten Commandments, written in a form of Hebrew that predated Columbus by at least 1,000 years. The implications were staggering. If authentic, the Los Lunas stone proved that ancient Semitic peoples had reached North America long before any accepted historical timeline. It would rewrite everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian contact between the Old World and the New. Hibben documented the stone extensively, photographing the inscription and making detailed notes about its location and condition. He shared his findings with colleagues at the university, expecting academic excitement. Instead, he received warnings. Within weeks of his initial report, Hibben was visited by representatives from the Smithsonian Institution. They examined his photographs and documentation, asked detailed questions about the stone's exact location, and then delivered a clear message. This discovery should not be publicized. The academic establishment was not ready for findings that contradicted accepted history. Hibben was not the type to be easily silenced. He continued researching the stone and attempted to publish his findings in academic journals. His papers were rejected without substantive critique. When he persisted, his other work began receiving unusual scrutiny. Funding for unrelated projects was suddenly questioned. His reputation, previously impeccable, began to suffer whispered attacks. The stone itself remained on the hillside, too massive to easily remove and on land that complicated jurisdictional claims. But access to the site became increasingly difficult. The landowner reported pressure to restrict visitors. Other researchers who attempted to study the inscription found their careers similarly affected. What made the suppression particularly suspicious was the quality of the inscription itself. Later analysis by Hebrew scholars confirmed that the script was consistent with Paleo-Hebrew from approximately 500–1000 BCE. The carving technique showed weathering patterns suggesting extreme age. Multiple experts who examined the stone privately confirmed its apparent authenticity, but none would say so publicly. The Los Lunas stone still exists today, though it has been vandalized and weathered significantly since Hibben's discovery. It sits on state land, officially classified as a curiosity of unknown origin. The Smithsonian has never conducted an official study. Academic papers examining the inscription remain difficult to publish in mainstream journals. Hibben went to his grave, insisting the stone was genuine evidence of ancient Semitic presence in the Americas. The evidence he gathered, photographs, measurements, linguistic analysis, largely disappeared from university archives after his death. What remains is a mystery that the archaeological establishment still refuses to seriously investigate. The Exhambaro figures. In 1944, a German merchant named Waldemar Julsrud was riding his horse near Acámbaro, Mexico, when he noticed ceramic fragments protruding from the ground. What he excavated over the following years would become one of the most controversial and most suppressed archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Julsrud eventually unearthed over 33,000 ceramic figurines from the site. Many depicted humans in various activities. Nothing unusual for an archaeological find in Mexico. But thousands of the figurines depicted something that shouldn't have been possible. Dinosaurs. Not stylized dragons or mythical creatures, but anatomically accurate representations of species that went extinct 65 million years before humans existed. The figurines showed humans interacting with dinosaurs, riding them, hunting them, fleeing from them. The level of anatomical detail was remarkable. The creatures depicted included apparent representations of Brachiosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, and pterosaurs. Some showed species that weren't even recognized by Western science until after the figurines were discovered. Julsrud invited scientists to examine the collection. Initial reactions were astonishment, followed by immediate skepticism. The figurines were either evidence that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, which contradicted everything in evolutionary biology, or they were elaborate fakes. The scientific establishment quickly decided they must be fakes, but proving fraud was more difficult than expected. Thermoluminescence dating, conducted in 1968, dated the figurines to at least 4,500 years old. The patina and mineral deposits on the ceramics were consistent with ancient burial. The sheer number of figurines, over 33,000, made a hoax logistically implausible. No modern workshop was ever identified. No forger ever confessed. The Mexican government responded by seizing portions of the collection for study. Those figurines were never returned, and their current location remains unknown. Government officials declared the remaining collection fraudulent without conducting official testing. Museums that had expressed interest were discouraged from acquiring pieces. Charles Hapgood, a respected professor who had previously been praised by Albert Einstein for his geological theories, conducted an extensive investigation of the Acambaro figures in the 1950s and 1960s. He became convinced they were genuine artifacts representing knowledge that contradicted accepted history. His findings were never published by mainstream academic journals. His reputation suffered for his association with the collection. Several figurines that remained in private hands were subjected to independent testing over the decades. Results consistently showed ancient origin. Dating methods suggested the ceramics were thousands of years old, but each positive result was dismissed as contamination, error, or fraud by mainstream archaeologists who never examined the pieces themselves. The Acambaro collection was effectively quarantined from serious scientific inquiry. The Mexican government's seized portion has never been displayed or made available for study. Private collectors who own pieces report pressure to keep them out of public view. The discovery that should have revolutionized our understanding of human history was instead buried by institutions that couldn't accept what the artifacts implied. The Tecáxic-Calixtlahuaca head. In 1933, archaeologist José García Payón was excavating a burial site at Tecáxic-Calixtlahuaca in Mexico's Toluca Valley when he discovered something that didn't belong. Buried beneath 3 intact floors of a pre-Columbian building, sealed in an offering deposit that hadn't been disturbed since before the Spanish conquest, was a small terracotta head depicting a bearded man with distinctly European features. The head showed Roman artistic style and craftsmanship. It depicted a figure with curly hair, a beard, and features nothing like any known Mesoamerican art. If the archaeological context was accurate, and Payón was a respected professional who documented the excavation meticulously, then a Roman-era artifact had somehow reached Mexico at least 1,000 years before Columbus. Payón understood the significance immediately. He photographed the find in situ, documented its exact position within the sealed deposit, and noted the undisturbed stratigraphy that proved no one had accessed that layer since before Spanish contact. The science was solid. The implications were explosive. News of the discovery began spreading through academic circles. Then the Mexican government intervened. The artifact was transferred to the Museo Nacional de Antropología in Mexico City, where it was placed in storage rather than display. Payón was discouraged from publishing detailed findings. The head effectively vanished from public awareness for decades. When researchers attempted to study the artifact in subsequent years, access was consistently denied or delayed. Requests for testing were rejected. The museum's official position became that the head was likely a colonial-era fake that had somehow become mixed with authentic artifacts, despite Payón's detailed documentation of the sealed context. In the 1990s, when advanced testing methods became available, independent researchers finally managed to obtain permission to analyze the head. Thermoluminescence dating confirmed what Payón had claimed. The artifact was approximately 1,800 years old, consistent with Roman manufacture. The terracotta was European in composition. The artistic style matched 2nd century Roman work. The test results were published in a peer-reviewed journal. The evidence strongly supported transoceanic contact between the Roman world and pre-Columbian Mexico. The discovery should have transformed our understanding of ancient maritime capabilities. Instead, mainstream archaeology largely ignored the findings. The artifact remains in storage at the Mexican Museum, not displayed to the public. Textbooks don't mention it. The archaeological establishment has effectively decided that one anomalous artifact, however well documented, cannot be allowed to overturn established chronology. Jose Garcia Payon died without seeing his discovery receive the recognition it deserved. The head he excavated remains in a drawer somewhere in Mexico City, physical evidence of contact that history says never happened. The Kingman UFO artifact. In May 1953, something crashed in the desert near Kingman, Arizona. Whatever it was, the U.S. military responded immediately, cordoning off the area and bringing in personnel from multiple agencies. Among those called to the scene was an engineer who would later describe seeing not just wreckage, but artifacts, objects that seemed manufactured, but with technology he couldn't identify or explain. The engineer's account, given under pseudonym to protect his identity, described being brought to a site where a large metallic object had impacted the desert floor. Military personnel were already cataloging debris when he arrived. His job was to analyze specific components that had been separated from the main wreckage. What he described seeing defied conventional explanation. Metal that was impossibly light, yet incredibly strong. Components with no visible welds or fasteners, as if grown rather than manufactured. Materials that didn't match any known alloy. Most disturbing were what appeared to be control interfaces, panels with symbols in an unknown language, buttons that seemed designed for hands that weren't quite human. The engineer and other civilian specialists were debriefed extensively after their work at the site. They were reminded of their security clearances and the consequences of disclosure. The artifacts they had examined were crated and transported, destination unknown. All documentation was classified. For decades, the Kingman incident remained hidden behind walls of official denial. Then, in 1973, a researcher named Raymond Fowler managed to locate and interview the engineer. His account was detailed, consistent, and technically sophisticated. Not the ramblings of a hoaxer, but the observations of a trained professional. Other witnesses gradually emerged. A former military police officer who had guarded the perimeter, a truck driver who had transported crates from the site to a military installation, a radar operator who had tracked something unusual before the crash. Their accounts corroborated the engineer's story. The artifacts themselves have never been officially acknowledged. Requests through the Freedom of Information Act have been denied on national security grounds. The classified status of documentation from 1953 remains in effect over 70 years later. Whatever was recovered from the Kingman Desert, and whatever was learned from studying it, remains locked away. Some researchers believe the Kingman artifacts, along with materials from similar incidents, are held at facilities like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they have been studied in secret programs for decades. Others believe key pieces were distributed to defense contractors for reverse engineering. The truth remains classified. What's clear is that something significant was recovered from the Arizona desert in 1953. Civilian experts were brought in to analyze it. They saw artifacts that challenged their understanding of technology and manufacturing, and then those artifacts disappeared into a classification system that has kept them hidden from the public for over 7 decades. The Kensington Runestone. In 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman was clearing land near Kensington, Minnesota, when his son discovered a large stone tangled in the roots of a tree. The stone bore a lengthy inscription in Scandinavian runes. Translated, it described a party of Norse explorers who had ventured deep into North America in 1362, over a century before Columbus. The inscription told a story of tragedy. The explorers had left companions by the shore, returned to find them murdered, and carved the stone as a record before continuing their journey into the unknown interior. The level of detail was remarkable. The number of men, their route, the date according to medieval Scandinavian calendars. Ochman reported his discovery to local academics, expecting interest in this potential evidence of Norse exploration. Instead, he became the target of immediate accusations of fraud. University scholars declared the stone a fake within weeks, without conducting detailed analysis. The Scandinavian runes, they claimed, were inconsistent with medieval usage. But the fraud accusations never quite held up. Oman was a farmer with limited education, an unlikely master forger of medieval runic inscriptions. The stone showed extensive weathering beneath the inscriptions, suggesting the carving had been exposed to elements for centuries. Experts who actually examined the physical evidence often came away less certain of fraud than those who dismissed it from a distance. The Smithsonian Institution took possession of the stone for study in 1948. It remained there for decades, largely inaccessible to independent researchers. Requests to conduct modern materials analysis were routinely denied. The institution's official position remained that the stone was a 19th century hoax, despite never publishing detailed findings to support this conclusion. In 2000, geologist Scott Wolter was finally permitted to conduct extensive testing on the stone. His analysis of weathering patterns suggested the inscription was at least 200 years old, and possibly much older. The mineral deposits in the carved grooves were consistent with centuries of exposure. Far from proving fraud, the physical evidence supported authenticity. Wolter's findings were largely ignored by the academic establishment. The Kensington runestone has become a touchstone for debates about archaeological gatekeeping. Physical evidence that challenges accepted history, dismissed without adequate investigation by institutions that control access to the artifacts themselves. The stone was eventually returned to Minnesota, where it sits in a local museum. The Smithsonian has never released complete documentation of their testing. The question of whether Norse explorers reached Minnesota in 1362 remains officially debunked, but the evidence that supposedly proved fraud has never been made public. The Dropa stones. In 1938, a Chinese archaeologist named Chi-Pu Te led an expedition into the remote Bayankara Ula Mountains on the border between China and Tibet. In caves high in the mountains, his team discovered something that would remain suppressed for decades: hundreds of precisely made stone discs, each about 1 foot in diameter, with spiral grooves running from center to edge. The grooves, under microscopic examination, proved to contain microscopic hieroglyphics, telling an incredible story. The discs were found alongside unusual skeletal remains, humanoid, but with abnormally large skulls and small, fragile bodies. The cave walls contained carved images showing the sun, moon, stars, and figures that appeared to be wearing helmets. The site suggested a burial ground, but for whom? Chi-Pu Te's team carefully excavated 716 of the stone discs and transported them to Beijing for analysis. Initial study of the microscopic hieroglyphics was painstaking. The characters were too small to read without magnification and were unlike any known Chinese script. For over 2 decades, the discs sat in storage while scholars attempted to decipher them. Then, in 1962, another Chinese professor named Tsum Nui published a translation that caused immediate controversy. According to his analysis, the discs told the story of beings called the Dropa, who crashed in the mountains 12,000 years ago. Unable to repair their spacecraft, they lived in the caves and gradually died out. The Chinese Academy of Prehistory immediately suppressed Tsum Nui's findings. His paper was declared fraudulent. He was prohibited from publishing further research. Shortly after, he reportedly left China entirely and disappeared from academic records. The discs themselves were divided and scattered. Some reportedly went to Soviet scientists who conducted their own analysis and found the stones contained unusual amounts of cobalt and other metals. Others were allegedly destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. Still others may have been transferred to classified storage. Attempts by Western researchers to verify the existence of the Dropa stones have been consistently frustrated. Chinese authorities deny the discoveries ever occurred. The caves described by Chi-Pu Te have never been officially located by outside investigators. Soviet research files on the stones remain classified. Several stones allegedly matching the description have surfaced in private collections over the years. Analysis has shown them to be precisely manufactured with grooves that do contain microscopic markings. But without access to the original excavation records or the bulk of the collection, authentication remains impossible. The Dropa stones represent one of the most thoroughly suppressed archaeological discoveries in modern history. An expedition occurred, artifacts were recovered, translation was attempted, and then everything, the stones, the research, the researchers, was systematically erased from official records. The Nampa image. In 1889, workers drilling a water well near Nampa, Idaho, made a discovery that the scientific establishment has spent over a century trying to bury. At a depth of 320 feet, Beneath multiple layers of volcanic basalt that geologists dated to the Pliocene epoch, they recovered a small clay figurine depicting a human form. The implications were impossible to accept. The geological layers above the figurine were at least 2 million years old. If the artifact was genuinely found in situ, it meant human beings, or something capable of manufacturing clay figurines, existed in North America millions of years before any accepted timeline for human evolution, let alone human presence in the Americas. The figurine was examined by multiple geologists and scientists in the years following its discovery. They confirmed the depth of the find. They verified the integrity of the geological layers. There was no evidence of a shaft or intrusion that could have allowed a more recent artifact to reach that depth. The basalt layers were intact and undisturbed. George Frederick Wright, a geologist of considerable reputation, investigated the discovery thoroughly. He interviewed the well drillers, examined the site, studied the figurine, and concluded that the find was genuine. His report was published by the Boston Society of Natural History in 1889 and created an immediate sensation. Then the suppression began. Scientists who hadn't examined the evidence declared the discovery impossible and therefore fraudulent. The Smithsonian Institution, which had initially expressed interest in acquiring the figurine, withdrew after conducting a brief examination that was never published. Academic journals that had covered the discovery began printing retractions and dismissals. Wright stood by his findings and faced professional consequences. His other work was questioned. His credibility was attacked. The message to other scientists was clear. Endorsing the Nampa figurine meant risking your career. The figurine itself passed through several hands before ending up at the Idaho State Historical Society. For decades, it was kept in storage rather than display. Requests to conduct modern dating and materials analysis have been repeatedly denied or ignored. What makes the suppression particularly notable is what it protected. In 1889, the established timeline for human evolution was already set. Evidence contradicting that timeline, especially evidence from the Americas, threatened not just academic theories but powerful cultural narratives about the recent arrival of humans in the New World. The Nampa figurine remains in Idaho, officially classified as a curiosity of doubtful provenance. The geological evidence suggesting its impossible age has never been scientifically refuted, only dismissed by authorities who never examined it firsthand. The Aiud artifact. In 1974, workers excavating sand along the Mureș River near Aiud, Romania, discovered 3 objects buried approximately 35 feet beneath the surface. 2 of the objects were mastodon bones, dating to the Pleistocene epoch, at least 10,000 years ago and possibly much older. The third object was something that shouldn't have existed alongside ancient animal remains, a manufactured piece of metal. The artifact was a wedge-shaped piece approximately 8 inches long, composed primarily of aluminum with traces of copper, zinc, and other metals. This composition posed an immediate problem for conventional explanation. Aluminum wasn't produced by humans until the 19th century. The metal requires sophisticated electrolytic processes to extract from ore. Yet here was an aluminum object buried at the same depth as prehistoric animal bones. Romanian scientists examined the artifact and were baffled. The object showed clear signs of manufacturing, precise angles, uniform thickness, evidence of machining. The patina on the surface was consistent with extreme age. The sand layers where it was found were undisturbed, ruling out the possibility of recent burial. Initial reports appeared in Romanian scientific journals, and the artifact was displayed briefly at the History Museum of Cluj-Napoca. Then it was transferred to storage and access was restricted. When international researchers attempted to study the object, they encountered bureaucratic obstacles. Romanian authorities alternately denied the artifact existed, claimed it was a modern tool that had been misidentified, or simply ignored requests for information. The scientists who had initially examined it stopped speaking publicly about their findings. Some researchers have proposed that the Aiud artifact could be a fragment from a World War II aircraft or industrial equipment that somehow became buried in ancient strata. But this explanation doesn't account for the object's location beneath 35 feet of undisturbed sediment, or its discovery alongside genuine Pleistocene fossils. Others have suggested more exotic possibilities, that the artifact is evidence of an advanced ancient civilization or even extraterrestrial contact. These theories remain unproven, but so does any conventional explanation. The artifact's composition and the circumstances of its discovery simply don't fit accepted archaeology. The Aiud artifact reportedly remains in Romanian custody, inaccessible to independent researchers. No comprehensive analysis has ever been published. The Romanian scientific community has effectively quarantined a discovery that could challenge fundamental assumptions about the history of technology, or reveal the existence of capabilities we don't understand. The giant bones of Lovelock Cave. In 1911, miners extracting bat guano from Lovelock Cave in Nevada began finding human remains, but not ordinary remains. The bones were unusually large, belonging to individuals who would have stood well over 6 feet tall, with some estimates suggesting heights of 7 feet or more. More disturbing still, some skulls showed red hair, preserved by the cave's dry environment. The discoveries continued for years as mining operations exposed layer after layer of the cave's deposits. Along with the oversized remains, workers found sophisticated artifacts, duck decoys made from woven tool reeds that were so advanced they remained functional, sandals much larger than those made for typical Native Americans, and weapons scaled for users of unusual size. Local Paiute oral traditions provided an unexpected context. Tribal histories described a race of red-haired giants called the Site-Ka, who had lived in the region long before the Paiute arrived. According to legend, the Site-Ka were cannibalistic and warred with the Paiute and other tribes. Eventually, a coalition of tribes trapped the giants in a cave and set fire to it, destroying them. That cave was said to be Lovelock. When news of the discoveries reached academic institutions, the response was not excitement, but concern. The existence of a race of red-haired giants in ancient Nevada contradicted established narratives about Native American origins. The Smithsonian Institution dispatched representatives to acquire the most significant finds. What happened next remains controversial. Some of the remains and artifacts were sent to museums and universities, where they were subsequently lost or placed in restricted storage. Other items were allegedly destroyed as inconsistent with accepted archaeology. Researchers who attempted to study the oversized bones found their access blocked or the specimens unavailable. Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, a Paiute author and activist, wrote about the Site-Ka legends in her 1883 book, decades before the Lovelock discoveries. Her accounts matched what miners found in the cave with disturbing precision. But rather than treating this correlation as significant evidence, academic authorities dismissed both the physical remains and the oral traditions. Today, the Lovelock Cave artifacts are scattered across multiple institutions. The oversized skeletal remains have largely disappeared from documented collections. Researchers who try to locate them are told the bones were misidentified, lost, or never existed. The cave itself has been closed to excavation since the original mining operations ended. The Paiute maintain their oral traditions about the red-haired giants. The artifacts that survive, particularly the sophisticated duck decoys, demonstrate a level of craftsmanship that has impressed modern archaeologists. But the oversized remains that gave context to these artifacts, and potentially confirmed indigenous oral history, have been effectively erased from the archaeological record. The Baghdad Battery. In 1938, German archaeologist Wilhelm Königs was examining artifacts at the Iraq Museum in Baghdad when he noticed something strange. Several clay jars, each about 6 inches tall, contained copper cylinders with iron rods suspended inside. The configuration was immediately recognizable to anyone with knowledge of electrochemistry. It was a battery. The artifacts dated to approximately 200 BCE. König published a paper proposing that these were ancient galvanic cells, devices capable of generating electrical current nearly 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta created the first modern battery in 1800. He speculated that they might have been used for electroplating gold onto silver objects, a technique that would explain certain ancient artifacts whose gilding had puzzled metallurgists. The implications were significant. If ancient Parthian or Mesopotamian craftsmen understood electrochemistry, it suggested a level of scientific sophistication that contradicted conventional views of ancient technological capabilities. It also raised questions about what other knowledge might have existed and been lost. Koenig's paper attracted attention, and several researchers conducted experiments demonstrating that the artifacts could indeed generate electricity when filled with an acidic solution, like vinegar or grape juice. The design worked. The question was whether it was intentional or coincidental. Then the suppression began, not through dramatic confiscation, but through marginalization. Koenig's findings were dismissed as speculative. His battery hypothesis was labeled fringe, without being seriously investigated. Mainstream archaeologists proposed alternative explanations. The vessels were for storing scrolls, or holding sacred objects, or purposes unknown. None of these alternatives explained the specific configuration of copper, iron, and insulating materials. The Iraq War scattered the Baghdad Museum's collections. Some artifacts were looted, others evacuated, still others destroyed. The original batteries examined by Koenig disappeared into the chaos. When researchers attempted to locate them after the war, museum records were incomplete or contradictory. Several similar artifacts have been identified in other collections, suggesting the Baghdad battery wasn't unique. But access to these objects has been consistently restricted. Proposals to conduct definitive testing, examining the interiors for chemical residues that would prove electrical use, have been denied or ignored. The Baghdad batteries remain officially classified as ritual objects of unknown purpose. The hypothesis that ancient people understood electrochemistry, knowledge that was then lost for nearly 2 millennia, is still dismissed as fringe speculation. The physical evidence that could resolve the question has been conveniently scattered or lost. These 10 cases share a troubling pattern. Archaeological discoveries that challenged accepted historical narratives were suppressed, confiscated, or marginalized by the very institutions charged with advancing knowledge. The artifacts didn't disappear by accident. They were deliberately buried, sometimes literally, in museum storage rooms and classified facilities where they remain inaccessible to independent researchers. The methods of suppression varied. Some artifacts were physically confiscated by government agencies or powerful institutions like the Smithsonian. Others were discredited through campaigns targeting the discoverers' reputations. Still others simply vanished into bureaucratic limbo, acknowledged to exist, but perpetually unavailable for study. What these artifacts had in common was their potential to overturn established narratives. The Los Lunas stones suggested ancient Semitic peoples reached the Americas millennia before Columbus. The Acámbaro figures implied humans and dinosaurs coexisted. The Tekaxic-Calixtlahuaca head indicated Roman-era transoceanic contact. Each discovery threatened not just academic theories, but the cultural and institutional power built on those theories. The archaeologists who made these discoveries paid professional prices for their integrity. Frank Hibben, Chipu Te, Tsum Nui, George Frederick Wright. Each saw their careers damaged or destroyed for refusing to abandon findings that the establishment couldn't accept. Their experiences sent a clear message to other researchers: challenge accepted history at your own risk. Perhaps most disturbing is how effectively the suppression has worked. Most people have never heard of these artifacts. The discoveries that could revolutionize our understanding of human history sit in storage rooms, classified facilities, or private collections, hidden from the public that has every right to know about them. The question is why? What threatens powerful institutions so fundamentally about evidence that human history might be longer, stranger, and more complex than textbooks admit? What would change if we accepted that ancient peoples had capabilities we've been taught they lacked? What interests are served by keeping these artifacts buried? The archaeologists who found these objects knew what they discovered. They documented their finds, fought for recognition, and tried to share their evidence with the world. They were silenced, but the artifacts remain. Somewhere, in museum basements, government warehouses, private vaults, or scattered across collections that have lost track of what they hold. Every one of these cases could be resolved through modern testing and transparent investigation. The technology exists to definitively date these objects, analyze their composition, and verify or debunk the claims made about them. What doesn't exist is the institutional will to conduct that analysis. Until that changes, the forbidden discoveries will remain forbidden. Physical evidence of a past we're not supposed to know about, guarded by institutions that have decided the truth is too dangerous to share.